Welcome to Time to Press Pause, real life stories from the C-suite. I'm your host, Ellen Williams, CEO of The Salient Strategist, and today we're doing things a little differently. Today we have two guests. The first is Andrea Chilcote. Andrea is CEO of Morningstar Ventures and author of What Leaders Need Now. She has nearly 3 decades of experience in the organizational development, coaching, and consulting field. Her notable work includes enterprise-wide organizational development initiatives, as well as executive coaching, partnering with executives and their teams across a variety of Fortune 500 companies and diverse business sectors. Andrea is also the host of What Leaders Need Now podcast series on YouTube. Today's second guest is Stephanie Borsari. Stephanie is co-founder of Institute for Private Philanthropy and a chartered advisor in philanthropy, CAP. She has devoted her entire career to the social change sector, and her expertise is with private foundations and the people who govern them. Stephanie is a 2164 certified advisor and facilitator and a member of the Purposeful Planning Institute, PPI, the National Network for Consultants to Grantmakers, NNCG, and the International Association of Advisors in Philanthropy, AIP. She is also a host of a podcast called Giving Voices, featuring stories told by and about philanthropists. Welcome, Andrea and Stephanie, to Time to Press Pause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is a little unique for the podcast, the first time that I have two guests, and I'm really interested in how this is going to all roll out. But first, Andrea, you and I connected and we talked a little bit about you being a guest, and it was your suggestion that you bring on your client, Stephanie. Why don't you give us a little background as to why you thought this would be a great idea?
Well, as an executive coach, I often work with people who are either forced to press pause or decide to press pause. And as I thought about this conversation today, I thought there's 3 categories of reasons why people press pause. Either there's an unplanned reason because of restructure, job elimination, and those are people that are shocked into a pause and they have to decide what they're going to do next. The other category are the people who retire because it seems to be time, or they've decided that at 55, I'm going to retire, or at 62, I'm going to retire, or I've got the 401k set up and I'm ready, but they don't know what to do next. They know there's what they call now a 2.0, but they don't know what to do next. So they want to do this press pause. But then there's another category, and these are the people who find it all of a sudden or slowly intolerable to be where they're at. And they either have a values clash or a lifestyle clash, or the work itself. They look up one day and say, why am I doing what I'm doing? And the reason that I asked that we could invite Stephanie is that she falls into that last category. And I thought her story would be really helpful for your listeners.
Thank you so much for outlining those 3 categories. And Stephanie, why am I doing what I'm doing? That's a tough one. Honestly, I think we've all sort of been there at some point. So please, I'm really interested. Please share your press pause story.
Thank you for the invitation to do so. And Andrea, your setup is sort of extraordinary, because every time you said, well, at this, they fall into this, I went, yep, check, yep, check, yep, check. Why am I doing this? Values clash, slowly realizing that my lifestyle didn't match the work environment. But I also credit, we'll use that word, you for me pressing pause. Our work together and your approach to listening and asking these really insightful questions that I couldn't even think to ask myself is what got me to the place where one day you said, take your pen, write in your notebook, I am going to leave X environment, which was my former employer. And I remember in doing that kind of going, I can't do this. This is, and wrote it down. It was an incredible exercise because then when I looked at it, I knew I meant it. And what brought me there was, Andrea, you'll know even better than I, but we did these personality assessments, right?
We did Berkman, and we did a variety of DISC assessments.
Do you remember what you said, that you have like a handful of people that fall into this particular category where like I don't lean or fall absolutely into arts, absolutely into corporate, absolutely into any one category?
You have such flexibility.
Yeah, it was something like that. It was like, you're doing all of this and you're really good at doing all of this, but it isn't where your heart is or your soul is. And at the end of the day, you're so exhausted by trying to be all of those things for which you were hired, that at the end of the day, there was nothing of me left. And working with you is what got me to that place.
Yes, the things that you were doing, even though you were good at them, and that this is true for so many people, even though you developed the skills, they weren't your true nature.
Yeah. Management, didn't love it, didn't want to do it, was doing it, a lot of it, as an example. So there was a period of time where it was quite ambiguous, Ellen. What does that mean? I'm going to leave. And then there was a situation at home that gave me a lot more, to use your word, Andrea, flexibility, that allowed me to put a date out there where there was a bit of a safety net, which I was very grateful for. And I put a date out there. I resigned. I gave 2 weeks, and then I didn't know what I was going to do. And I called it a professional sabbatical for this indeterminate period of time. Andrea, you'll remember some of the wacky things I said I was going to do because I was testing out all of these various parts of my soul and my personality and my psyche that I had not taken time to test. Remember, there was poetry. I'd never written poetry. I don't even read poetry, but there was that.
Beautiful poetry you wrote.
Well, thank you. I don't know about that. But then there was embroidery. Remember, I was going to make jeans and I was going to embroider jeans.
You still have the kit, right?
I do. I still have the kit. It hasn't even been opened. But this is what Press Pause for me felt like. It was an incredible time where my brain felt on fire. There were so many thoughts and ideas that were coursing through me. I didn't know what to do with them. It was incredibly ambiguous, which made it very destabilizing in a lot of ways. And it was ultimately, I came to the other side of it through a lot of networking and a lot of writing and probably some tears and cooking and walking and doing these things that I had not taken time for in any of my professional career, which by then spanned about nearly 30 years.
Okay, so let me unpack a little bit of this. You left your job, and I like the way you phrase this, testing out parts of my soul. And you gave us some examples of that. So based on going through that, what did you learn and what is the outcome? Are you now self-employed? Did you find another role somewhere else?
I'm self-employed. And frankly, it's in talking with Andrea and recognizing I'm not really happy and maybe not even that good at having a boss. So I work for myself. I have Stephanie Borsari Consulting, a very fancy name for philanthropic advisory work. I work with private foundations, the people who govern them. And it was through this professional sabbatical period when I started networking and talking with people in that sector, because of course that's who I knew from my prior experience working with private foundations and donors and in the nonprofit sector. And the more I talked with people, the more I just started realizing and remembering what I really want to do is the work. I don't want to be an executive. I don't want to be a manager. I want to work with families and donors to bridge their abundance with the incredible need in the world. That's what it came down to. And so I jumped in, I got my LLC and figured out what that meant. And I'm now just about 3 years in.
Wow, congratulations. 3 years is a great milestone.
That's what I keep hearing. Thank you.
Andrea, question as a coach. Now, we just heard the story of Stephanie having what sounds like from the outside a successful career, an executive, a manager, but certainly identifying that it wasn't where she needed to be or wanted to be, and transitioning into, for lack of a better word, back being a doer, right? More hands-on. Do you find this a lot in your coaching clients?
I wouldn't say that. I would say what I find a lot is that when people are serious about this pause and discover, they discover who they are and what they want next. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a sole proprietor of their own business, but it means that they find something that is aligned with who they are and what their values are. That could mean another role as a CEO, working in a nonprofit space. It could mean that they take a job that is very, very different than what they had before. It could mean doing something that is far less demanding than what they had so that they have more time for their personal lives that they had given up before. It really is about what Stephanie said, looking at not necessarily a personality instrument, but that informs you, but looking at themselves and looking at their soul, as she said, and asking the question, what do I want and what do I need in my life? And it's a privilege to be able to do that and answer the question and have the integrity to respond to what the answer is.
I love that you said it's a privilege to be able to do that. And I think people miss that part of the press pause. It is a privilege, but I don't think it's necessarily a luxury, right? I think everybody should find that moment or uncover or make time to have that privilege and focus on themselves and ask those tough questions as Stephanie mentioned. But as you said, Andrea, then with integrity, answer them. Because it's easy to answer questions to think the way you think they should be answered. Sometimes it's more difficult to answer those questions when you really step back and bring integrity and honesty, and it becomes a little eye-opening then. So thank you that it's not always the same path, because this was unique in some of the conversations I've had on the podcast where someone that was in a role of executive decided they wanted to get back to the hands-on. Not the first story I've heard, but somewhat unique. But I think that's great, because what we started with so many decades ago, unfortunately, right? That hands-on, and then you grow to this leader and you lose touch with that hands-on, but that really is what brings you the joy. So Stephanie, what have you found now is the difference in how you approach your day from when you were the executive to now being reconnected with your values and what makes you happy?
Aside from the technical part of not having to be at an office where a boss is watching to see what time I show up, and but in turn, I'm watching to see when others show up. Aside from having to be somewhere prescribed by someone else in an environment prescribed by someone else, I am a more vulnerable, emotional, sensitive person every day, all day. And what I learned through both my pause and leaning into this work that I am doing and surrounding myself with people I want to surround myself with is that that is ultimately my superpower. That the vulnerability and the emotional connection is what makes me me. And for nearly 30 years, that got compressed, that got compartmentalized. I had to have all of the answers. I am now very comfortable saying, I don't have the answers and I don't have to. We do this together. So for me, that's the biggest thing that's come out of that whole experience, even if I ever end up again in some executive leadership position somewhere else, that is now fully, absolutely who I am and who I will bring to any professional environment.
Yeah,
Bravo.
I like that, who you will bring with you. And that is a recurring theme. And we're hearing it more and more, that CEOs don't have all the answers, and they shouldn't have to. They have the answers they have, and then they have the teams to work with to work through the rest of the issues, problems, questions, challenges, whatever they're up against, where an answer is required. We've mentioned it before, and we've called it more modern leadership, and it seems like jumped into that bandwagon too. So I usually end the podcast asking what kind of advice you would have when a CEO could identify it's time to press pause. And today we get two pieces of advice. So let's start with you, Stephanie. When is it important for a CEO to identify it's time to press pause?
It's when you know you're not your best self. When you're not your best self, either in your family, to yourself, to the people that you are responsible for and to in the professional environment. Period.
Nice and simple, to the point. Perfect. Andrea.
I don't think I can top that. I think, yeah, when you're disengaged, when you look back and you say, I'm not the leader I once was, I'm not happy, I'm doing this for the wrong reasons.
I'm doing this for the wrong reasons, and I'm not my best self.
Yeah.
That's an intense place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, I think, awesome advice for it's time to press pause, right? If that's the life you're living, no one wants to be in those shoes. And unfortunately, sometimes we get there without even realizing it, until, I would think Stephanie would agree with this, someone like Andrea comes along and makes you ask those tough questions. Ladies, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you, Andrea, for the suggestion of having more than one guest. This was great. Thank you, Stephanie and Andrea, for being here on Time to Press Pause.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Time to Press Pause. If you're interested in learning more about Andrea, go to morningstarventures.com. If you're interested in learning more about Stephanie, go to stephanieborsari.com. If you're interested in learning more about me, please go to thesalientstrategist.com. And please join us again wherever you listen to your podcasts.